Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the October 23rd, 2024 Guild meeting. Great to see you all here. Today's topic is the Science Activation Team Infiniscope's digital suite of learning experiences that they're going to talk to us about. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that our annual survey is still going on, and I'm going to drop that link right now into the chat. This survey is going on to the end of the month. It is so important for us to hear from you. Even if you did not participate in many guild activities, we would really love your input and suggestions for the future, and just get a sense of how much you have participated, what your level of participation has been in guild activities and information sharing and community building, because that only helps us build support for future guild initiatives and continue this initiative to keep it going, essentially. So please fill out that survey if you have not yet. Okay, without further ado, I am going to give it away to the Infiniscope group. Please introduce yourselves and give us a few sentence bio and take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Svet. And nice to see some familiar faces here. So I'm Ariel Anbar. I'm the PI of the Infiniscope team. I'm a professor at ASU, astrobiologist, geoscientist, and I lead a center called the Center for Education Through Exploration that does a number of projects, but this Infiniscope project with the Science Activation Program is by far the largest. So let's just go around quickly. Diana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Hunsley. I'm a program manager with ASU and the Infiniscope program. Been working on Infiniscope since just about its inception in 2016. Jeff?
Then pop over to Jeff.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Jeffrey Bruce. I'm the manager of immersive technologies and the chief software architect for the Are We Alone project. And I've been at ETX for, 12, 13 years. Brandon?
Yeah, ETX is the Center for Education Through Exploration. It's our shorthand.
Yep.
So
Sorry,
I lead. Brandon.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brandon Hasty, and I'm a learning designer with ETX and the Infiniscope team, primarily working on Are We Alone? And actually immediately preceding this, I was also a grad student working with Ariel. So I just made that transition this past summer.
And immediately preceding that, Brandon was an undergraduate astrobiology major at Penn State University. So a lot of us have a lot of friends in common with Brandon. And I see lurking is Joe Tamer. Joe, why don't you introduce yourself, even though you're not formally part of our little song and dance here?
Joe Tamer, Deputy PI Infiniscope. Formerly worked with the Ames Astrobiology Academy and big advocate of VFTs. So I'm excited about this project and how it interplays with the other things we do in the center and for Infiniscope.
So what we'd like to do is spend, I'm guessing, about half an hour giving an overview of this project that we're developing for the Science Activation Program as part of our Infiniscope activities called Are We Alone? And I want to give you a little bit of a sense of the motivation of this. Then we want to walk you into the actual thing. I think we want to try to keep that to half an hour if we can, because we want to have a conversation with the Guild about the ways in which the Guild might interact with what we're doing. And I'll give the ending away. There's two ways that we are hoping to foster interactions with the Guild. One is that when learners or others go through the experience we're going to show you, we want to give them some kind of stake, some kind of motivation that is meaningful. And it occurred to us that having as a reward for going through this some sort of ability to then interact with real astrobiologists in the form of Guild affiliated astrobiologists might be a kind of neat thing for learners, and it might be a neat asset for the Guild to sort of be able to find people out there who are students and others who are astrobiology interested enough to go through this kind of experience and become somewhat expert in some key aspects of astrobiology. That might be kind of a fun and useful and productive interaction. So that's one level where we want to have a conversation with the Guild. The other is that, as you'll see, a part of the concept here is not just that we're building some centralized monolith and putting it out there. We're building a framework that should be extensible. And it's sitting on top of tools that we've developed that make it possible for people who are not coders or even expert learning designers to build compelling and interesting digital learning experiences at scale around their science or the things that they want to teach. So we're hoping also to foster connection with especially early career scientists in the Guild, as well as others who might be tied in with NASA missions or have good NASA science that they want to share, but don't have the tools or ability, right, to build these kind of things. So we're trying to provide a framework oriented around astrobiology for doing that. So that's a teaser. I'm going to come back to that a few times, and hope by the end of the half hour, we'll have a good sense of what we are imagining, and then we can talk about it openly. Does that sound good? Good plan? All right. So let me see if I can actually share my slides, because that's the first step to technology. All right. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? So are we alone? This is our nifty in progress graphic. So what is Are We Alone? So first of all, this flows out of a 2020 review of the Science Activation Program by the National Academy, which had a number of recommendations. But recommendation 6 was this very simple sentence: SciAct should build ongoing opportunities for dialogue with NASA Science Mission Directorates, missions, and scientists. And the impetus for this was a sense that some in the NASA community have, that it would be nicer if there was more vibrant connectivity between NASA missions, NASA scientists, and the SciAct and its programs. That this was an area for improvement. And so we kind of hatched an idea that led to what we're going to show you here. In response to this recommendation, we said to the SciAct, hey, we think we have some thought here what we could do to leveraging what we've been doing for a number of years. Christian Eriksen was kind or crazy or whatever enough to give us some augmentation funding to do this. That's kind of the origin of this. And so coming around to now talking to the Guild is totally in the spirit, right, of why we're doing this in the first place. This is about trying to find a way to build richer connectivity with scientists and missions. So what is Infiniscope, first of all? So at one level, Infiniscope is a portal. You can go to infiniscope.org and see all these experiences that we built over the 8 or so years of our existence so far, covering all sorts of Earth and space science topics. So at one level, it's these activities that we built and the portal that we've built to house them. The nature of these experiences is that they are not just slideshows or something like that. These are interactive activities that are designed to give rich formative feedback to learners. So they get tutored into these topics. It's not just read this and hope you remember it. And also personalized pathways. We're building on a platform that enables us to have a sort of choose your own adventure, and then things happen differently for different learners depending on on choices that they make along the way. That's kind of baked into these things. These experiences, while they're educational and they aren't designed to be games per se, they have a bit of a game-like feel in the sense that a game is an experience that gives you an interesting set of choices with feedback along the way. In a good game, no two players, right, have quite the same experience. So it's a bit like that when you go through any one of these experiences. So intelligent tutoring is kind of the tagline for that kind of technology. But we we put a lot of effort into building tools to make it possible for anyone who puts in some effort, willing to put in some effort, to build these kind of experiences, at least simple versions of them. So we built a set of creator tools. So one of them is called Simple Author, and you can see here it's kind of PowerPoint-like. So it's a way of kind of laying out screens with information of all sorts, media of all sorts, and then layering in interactive activities that turn these into sort of these dynamic learning experiences that actually provide feedback adaptive to what the student does, and depending on the sophistication of the designer, can give pretty rich tutoring experiences that guide learners through concepts towards deeper understanding. And that tool also enables, with a fairly simple drag and drop interface, instead of a lot of complex logic coding, the ability to create these kind of personalized pathways. Depending on what a student does on this screen and what answer they give and what kind of feedback they get, they may go down this pathway or that pathway. So setting up that logic just with text gets kind of daunting pretty quickly. So we've developed kind of drag and drop way to easily visualize and rearrange things as part of this Simple Author tool. And then related to this is much of what we do is very place-based. Jeffrey mentioned virtual field trips, VFTs. And so we put a lot of effort into building a tool that we call Tourit that allows for kind of do-it-yourself virtual field trips. So these are based in 360-degree sphericals to give you that kind of pseudo 3D, you are there feel, within which we can layer in all sorts of different media, whether it's a video or a hyperlink or text. And we've put a lot of effort into building a tool that makes it relatively easy for anyone, again, with a minimal learning curve, to be able to build their own experiences like this, freely available for education use. So Simple Author and Turret are these creator tools that we've developed to enable, let's say, a guild member, hint, right, who might have something cool that they want to teach, and or something that they want to convey that's tied to science that they know very well, to be able to build a compelling experience that uses best practices and these kind of tutoring type technologies. And if as much planetary science is, as much astrobiology is, it can be very place based and gripping in that you are there kind of a sense. All of this, this is a little too text heavy a slide, but all this is built on a platform that we have co-developed with Carnegie Mellon University. Once upon a time, you may have heard the name Smart Sparrow. We were tied to a startup company that was doing this technology. They were bought by Pearson. Long story short, with, again, support from Kristen and Lynn, who I see is here, and the SciAct, we migrated everything to a brand new platform that we co-developed with Carnegie Mellon University that is open source. It's academically based, so we got rid of all the for-profit entanglements. And this allows us then to create and modify experiences, to share and deploy them, to analyze what works, make changes, improve them. So really this all sits on a system, on a platform that is a system for iteratively improving the quality of what we put out. So this brings me then, that's a little bit of background about Infiniscope and the kind of things that we do, right? So we build really cool experiences, they tutor students to success, and we build tools that make it possible for people who are not developers to build things that are pretty compelling in that regard. So Are We Alone? So what is Are We Alone all about? So when we asked ourselves, what could we do to foster more connectivity with scientists and missions? We kind of looked and said, we've developed a large community. We have 4,000 educators in our network, but we focus very heavily on that community with teachers in particular, and some college faculty. But we hadn't focused all that much around figuring out how we can make this technology really easily available for scientists and kind of take a bit of a mission first approach to it, of saying, okay, there's a mission on Mars that's doing X. It's generating all this interesting science, and there's all these scientists who would love to do really great education outreach. How can we take our technology stack and bring it to them, right, in a way that is compelling for them to say, oh, this is a great tool for us to, and an outlet for us to be able to do some of the education outreach that we'd like to do, but we haven't really seen a framework for it. So we started thinking hard about how we might do that. So that's the genesis of Are We Alone? And Brandon's going to walk through this in beautiful and compelling detail in a minute, but I want to give you kind of a roadmap of what we've designed. We're trying to design a framework that is extensible, kind of infinitely extensible, so that scientists and missions could kind of infinitely augment and add on to this over time. So the idea is you begin in kind of this central mission control space, which is fictitious. I mean, we're trying to hit the right balance between the real science, the real settings, real Mars locations, eventually real, Europa locations or whatever, and a little bit of, beyond real flavor, just for fun. So you start a kind of a mission control space from which you can then go to a number of different directions. One of them, the first one you would go to, is a Hab Lab. The Hab Lab is the repository for activities and lessons that help you experience and learn about two broad areas. One is habitability, right? What makes an environment potentially habitable? And the other is biosignatures. How might we go about looking for life? And into this, we could layer all sorts of things. I mean, there's a lot of meta lessons about, what constitutes evidence and things like that many people here are conversant with. We could imagine building some pretty interesting activities around those kind of topics. But at a first level, what we're imagining is, in the biosignatures, from Biosignatures Hub, you could learn about biosignature molecules or structures or isotopes or whatever biosignature topic is of interest to be taught. And in the Habitability Hub, one could then have lessons and activities that teach you about the importance of water, about the temperature ranges that life can tolerate and why, as far as we know, elemental requirements, and so on and so forth. So there's a a section of this where you're learning about habitability and biosignatures and drilling down as far as the development can take us. And then once you've learned some of that, then you go to Earth analogs. I mean, we have a lot of resources that we've built over the years, and of course, a lot of other people out there who developed great media and resources and assets and have field sites on Earth that are spectacular analog environments for many of the things that we want to look for beyond Earth. So again, the same topics can show up here, right? So how do we learn about structures and isotopes and molecules and potential biosignatures from Earth analog environments? And what do we learn about the importance of water and the temperature limits of life and elemental requirements of life from Earth analog environments? Each of these can be areas for potentially many different lessons and activities around these themes. And then finally, once you have learned some of the basic concepts, you've gone to Earth analogs. Now you go beyond Earth, and we're imagining developing two kind of broad zones, although probably three eventually because we need to have exoplanets. But we have rocky worlds in the solar system. We have icy moons. We'll have exoplanets. And the idea here is to organize around those areas where NASA has missions that have data that around which one could build compelling and interesting activities and lessons. And so if you go to Mars, for example, right, the same themes, let's say structures, isotopes, molecules that you're looking for, things that we are looking for on Mars, show up here. And so the idea is, and here's a highlighted pathway, right? One could come into mission control, go to the Hab lab, learn about morphological structures of the biosignature. Like what does that even mean? What is a morphological structure? Then one could go to an Earth analog environment and learn about how we recognize, structures that we think are biogenic in the ancient geological record. And then one could go beyond Earth to Mars and look at Mars imagery and try to see, is there anything here that looks vaguely biological, why or why not, and walk people through the thought process that we scientists really go through, and sometimes getting excited about things, but then applying our critical minds and realizing that, well, we haven't found anything that is, persuasive. So what Brandon's going to do now is walk through exactly that pathway, I think, if you coordinate it correctly, showing you what we've actually built so far and how this kind of works and feels. So I'm going to turn it over to Brandon. Stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ariel. That was a wonderful overview of the project. And so like he says, we'd now like to take you through our latest version, sort of a demo of what we have so far. So this is just an Are We Alone title screen that transitions you into the project. And here, this is a screen that loosely kind of sets up the narrative that we're exploring to kind of work within this framework. So I'll just lightly describe this. Right now, we're working with a narrative where we envision that the user is a member of the general population, possibly joining an organization that's interested in studying and preserving astrobiology research, as well as wanting to be involved in outreach. And so you want to potentially become a member of this organization where you'll learn the skills and techniques that real professional astrobiologists are using to actually do things like search for life. Then you can put yourself in some of those environments and actually try to apply those techniques while trying to contribute to this bigger goal of potentially connecting with the professional astrobiology community, possibly organizing this research into sort of a library that could be used for future use, sort of type of thing. So we'll beam into our space here. This is our, like Ariel said, sort of fantastical space station mission control space. And so as you come in here, each of these spaces that we'll go through sort of has like a mission briefing or overview for what the space is intended to essentially do. So mission control here is essentially just getting you set up with what I kind of just pitched to you, that you're joining this organization. And eventually we'll kind of get into sort of more strict narrative details later, but the first initial setup is for you to get an ID card registration. So I'll speak a little bit on the gamification of the project, kind of like Ariel alluded to. So kind of taking that a step further, we're sort of envisioning that you get this ID card, which carries a clearance level and badges with it. So if you couldn't tell, I'm borrowing this idea from Pokemon. So you can see Professor Oak there. But you get your name and you get this clearance level that you can start with that would update depending on what level of training you've done. So let's say, like Ariel described, if you were to complete the training on morphological structures, let's say on Earth, then that could give you a badge or clearance level that allows you to then go explore that topic in an off-world location like Jezero Crater, Mars, which is essentially what we'll run through. So let's say, you put your name in here. That text is white, so it doesn't really work that well, actually. But you'd go through, and then you get your next direction, which is to proceed to the Hab Lab. Now, in the each of these spaces, obviously, we have these pathways to take you down some of the lines that Ariel was kind of showing you with the diagram. So we do have an emphasis on exploration, and we're just kind of showing you a template or example of a path that we could envision subject matter experts could kind of take in different directions as we move forward. This is our Hab Lab space. A little bit of work to do here, but essentially it's kind of like a catch-all or filter for you to kind of go down this biosignatures or habitability path. So we imagine that this room would just be decorated with different resources relating to life on Earth, sort of more general before you kind of get specific into those two areas. And so next, I'll just take you through to the biosignatures room, where we can kind of really start to get into content. And so we kind of have invented some fantastical other elements within the spaces themselves, and we kind of envision doing this to some of the other spaces you saw too. Here in your hub overview, this is the biosignatures room, where you can essentially explore all the different lines of evidence that scientists might use to search for life. And we're kind of doing that functionally using this bioscope, where we're going to bring something more familiar through to you to relate to you what the whatever the biosignature that you're interested in exploring is, and then sort of strip it down and get it to a point where it's actually the application that scientists actually use in their search for life. So our first example here is actually using something familiar like a T-Rex skeleton to get you to understand what morphology is, and then break that down into sort of looking for stromatolites potentially in other off-world environments. So we'll start to kind of get into this. So to activate the bioscope, you can use this button to then begin investigating biosignatures. And you see kind of our pride and joy right now is this animated dinosaur that actually, when we click on examine and we want to look at its individual biosignatures, comes through the portal and turns into a skeleton where we can actually look at the morphology of this organism. So it's kind of a really cool transition that we're proud of to get into sort of the overview of morphology and biosignatures. So you can also explore, the direct trace body fossil being the actual foot, and we can look at this structure, but we also have this animation where you can look at the trace fossil footprint. And then eventually what you'll do is you'll launch into a general overview of biosignatures. So we're intending that this is sort of an introductory lesson that can get you familiar with just what a biosignature is, and then we can break that down and go into individual signatures. Bear in mind that obviously this is a demo, so there's a little bit of sort of CSS work that kind of needs to be done here still. But you proceed through, using that dinosaur as a familiar object that we can all kind of understand. And then we're also teaching you about pseudosignatures here. So given that, some things that are created by natural processes can mimic life processes, we're trying to explain the difference here. And so we give you these two flashcards. The one on the right is a flint nodule. Text is a little dark right now, so it's hard to see, but that's obviously a pseudosignature, whereas this is an actual sauropod femur, which would be a real biosignature. So once you click through, we can move on from that. Then essentially, you have a prompt that's telling you to go investigate morphological structures here to kind of get a closer look at our dinosaur friend. And really sort of break down what's going on here. And so it just kind of picks up from there. As I said, the idea is to sort of tear apart the idea that we're not looking for dinosaur fossils, right? When we think about searching for life, we're not looking for evidence of life that big. That's quite rare, and dinosaurs didn't exist that long on Earth. So we're going to transition you into thinking about microbes and what the evidence of microbial life looks like and how long they've been around here on Earth, and et cetera, and why it makes sense for scientists to kind of look for those environments where that life is preserved and where it's kind of flourished. Here you can kind of see an example of our adaptive feedback where you can have multiple pathways for sort of investigation. So here, as the user, I'm choosing to investigate body fossils. And eventually it'll show me some examples of those body fossils. If I click next, it'll also show me an example of a pseudosignature that kind of looks like that body fossil. Kind of return back to the loop, and I can also investigate trace fossils. Same idea, that I will get an example of worm burrows on the top, and then the associated pseudosignature. And this will kind of just continue to break down to reinforce the point about, that these are actual biosignatures, signs of life. But again, transitioning slowly to sort of the focus on actual microbial life. And so ultimately, that lesson will conclude and prompt you to then go into the Earth analog space, where we'll actually go into a 360-degree environment on Earth to look at some morphological structures. And so this is our Earth analog space. It's kind of a little bit more Earth-coded and green. Then here we can transition into our actual lesson. So this is our lesson on morphological structures, right? Like I said, the idea is to focus on microbial life is sort of our big point here. And so we're going to be looking at stromatolites in 3 different environments in Western Australia. So we have actually 3 different tours put together here. One in Shark Bay, one in the Knossos locality in Pilbara, and also in the Buick locality. And so we have basically 3 different examples of age ranges of stromatolites that we see preserved from all the way back to 3.5 billion years ago. To actually living modern stromatolites, right? So these bacterial communities still exist and are still kind of doing their thing today. And so that kind of goes with our whole point that if we're looking for life out there, maybe we should start here. And so I'll give you an example of one of these 360-degree environments, right? You kind of saw the video that Ariel showed, but we can do this live. And so here we are in Shark Bay. As you can see, there's all kinds of different media that basically we can embed within these tours. And so as an example, here I linked to like the World Heritage site for Shark Bay, and you can get some cursory information about the site itself, all kinds of stuff really. And then also we have sort of our content-driven videos and actual content that we—
So what do we look for?
I want you to obviously follow along, and eventually you're kind of seated and guided along with actual content-driven questions. That way the user can sort of master the skill or technique that we want to teach you here. This is just an example of, obviously this is like an intro screen that we have you watch to kind of get you articulated with the site and sort of what's intended to go on here. Once that video ends, you kind of can proceed forward. Let's take a look at some of the different panos that are included in this site while we can. So there's 4 different 360-degree panoramas included pretty much in each site, I think, in this tour. So you have some lovely above water views here with some other associated content that you can see, individual pictures of some of the map pools that we took back in the day. Of course, other videos. This is a more pointed video about cyanobacterias completing photosynthesis. We have some really nifty underwater views where you can hang out with these fish and these stromatolites up close. There we go. So yeah, some really fantastic imagery to kind of give you a sense of what these objects are, even though they look so alien. And the last site is over here at the pier, where you can kind of see stromatolites from the surface, from the shallow, calm water over here. Again, more detail about what exactly stromatolites are, why are they called that, etc. And eventually, I would show it here, but I'd have to kind of go through more of the lesson. You transition to the Knossos locality to look at older examples of stromatolites, then the Buick locality to look at even older versions, kind of hammer that point home that, hey, these have been around for so long. this should kind of be our focus, and we should be looking for environments of these types when we're looking at off-world locations. So what that would ultimately do is set us up to then go to our Mars space, where we can go and actually, I believe for the first time ever, take a look at a 360-degree environment actually on Mars. And so what we envision for sort of these off-world exploration missions is that, you might have a number of different pathways that a subject matter expert might want to explore in a given location. So obviously Perseverance is doing a bunch of fantastic work in Jezero Crater. And you could, like I said, imagine different concepts that you might want to go down. And so these are some examples right now. Obviously, what we have built is the morphological structures, but we're envisioning that maybe, hey, someone might want to do something on mission instrumentation or Mars sample return or something very specific on water at Jezero Crater. We can have the ability to set up adaptive and individualized pathways for you to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at morphological structures. And we're going to transfer over to Jezero Crater. And voila, this is your 360-degree environment sitting actually in Jezero Crater. And so same type of deal where we have a bunch of different media elements embedded in these pages. Here as an example is some imagery from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, kind of setting up the selection process for Jezero Crater, telling us that there's some interesting material to come check out in this delta. Other examples, we have a really cool Mars mission timeline embedded in here, which actually is a complete summary of all missions that have been to Mars, going back to Mariner. So super cool, kind of for you to generally check out. And I should say that the idea as you pick one of these pathways is for you to get an individualized checklist based on whatever that objective or subject is. So these, this is obviously assuming that you have the badge or the clearance from going through the morphological structures lesson on Earth. This is set up to be a little bit more exploratory, where you have even more freedom to kind of do what you need to do. But also we're providing you this guiding checklist that should obviously achieve our goals of, having you assess this environment, or at least build up the understanding of what this environment prospects are for potentially holding life or having preserved evidence for morphological structures. So examples are something like check out the mission timeline. That's more general, but still applicable. But then it kind of gets into more specifics about the lithology that you see and some of the individual hotspots that you can kind of check out. So I can just show you some of the other sites. Let's go to the Van Zyl Overlook. Here I've actually embedded another tour within this tour. So I could throw a couple different hotspots here to kind of not obscure your view from the regular view of the Kodiak feature here. So this is a delta remnant within Jezero Crater. It's kind of telling us that there is some water flow into the crater itself. And then what these hotspots do as an example is it's teaching you about how a delta is formed and what exactly the stratigraphy looks like here that's telling us that the water was coming in from a certain direction. Also about like the surrounding features of the boulders that aren't exactly jagged, but aren't exactly smooth. So we kind of think that, this is a floodplain. All of this can obviously be sort of embedded within these tours to make whatever sort of subject or concept point that you want. So just briefly, I'll go to the couple other locations and then we can get into discussion. But this is Wildcat Ridge. So this is one of the fantastic examples of an exposed outcrop that looks super comparable to some of the stuff that you would see at the Knossos locality or at the Buick locality in the Earth morphological structures lessons. So beautiful exposed stratigraphy with layers you can kind of see in Betty's Rock, but also we have like a direct comparison to the Buick locality with Rocky Top here, where you can actually see annotated lithology here. So showing you that this is how biology interrupts that sedimentation here on Earth on the right. And then Mars doesn't look as fun, but still has some of the cool layering. So you can kind of make your interpretations there. Then last but not least, we go to Bucerius Island, which has a bunch of marginal carbonates around, which are excellent for preservation of biosignatures. And so that's kind of like the last sort of point that we're hammering home. Here we also talk about, like, as I said, the sites themselves should be applicable to different pathways. So you also have other forms of media that the user can explore that aren't necessarily tied to morphological structures. Like, if you wanted, you could watch
you never want to
Last Flight. That more or less takes us through the tour of Mars. Assuming you kind of did this whole checklist, then each of our lessons sort of ends with a cumulative or summative assessment that kind of should build up as sort of, the way I'm framing it, is a mission report. And so I almost envision that you might take this back to mission control and sort of log it in like a library, sort of just to work towards our narrative purposes. Now, maybe sort of like Ariel's speculating, that gives you some sort of currency or some opportunity to then connect with, the Astrobiology Guild or with actual professionals to have some sort of conversation, or you could ask some questions, stuff like that. So sort of our vision there moving forward. Yeah, guys, I think that's the complete pathway. I took a little bit extra time, but I think that's where we can end. Great. For
now. So thanks. So hopefully you can see kind of two things here. One is, and I tried to put this in notes, right? A number of things Brandon showed are kind of modular components, to where you could imagine building similar modular components around different topics or different sites. And the architecture that we're designing allows for that, and the tools that we've created make it fairly easy for us to onboard folks to do that, or to work with them as part of our science activation work, as opposed to what we're doing right now, which is we're building it all ourselves, right? Because we can only cover so much ground as a centralized team doing stuff ourselves. The real magic of outreach would be if we could kind of decentralize this and create a framework and a technology package and a training package that makes it possible for others to build stuff. So that's one key part of this. And the other key part is, if the narrative that kind of ended a little flat, Brandon got to the end, it's like, okay, so now what? We're missing that reward. Like, what? Okay, so now you've done all this, you've learned this, right? So now what? And as we kind of wrestled with that, we thought about some really gamified things, and they're all kind of cheesy at a certain level, and they take you away from realism. We came to this idea, well, what if the payoff for this is somehow that now you are a guild associate, or you are a member of some team that is tied to the guild, and you now, when there's, you have now permission to send Graham an email or whatever, right? Or whoever. I'm just looking at Graham because he's right there on my screen. When there's something in the news about astrobiology and you want to learn more or something like that, right? Or maybe Svet and I talked about this, and she said, yeah, this could kind of lead to like a astrobiology ambassador kind of thing, kind of like solar system ambassadors, where we through this create a community of folks who have demonstrated some interest and have now learned something, and maybe there a lot of them will be passionate to do outreach, and maybe the guild can help guide that community. Maybe that's an interesting thing. So we don't know where to go with that, right? And we kind of want your input to see what might make sense. That's why part of the reason we're here. So those two things, right? So floor is open.
So Ariel, I guess I can ask the question of what is your end goal with this product? So like, let me rephrase it this way. Like, if in your dream scenario, you had the guild members with relevant expertise in these subtopics that you're interested in building these digital modules for, if you had that at your disposal, I guess, what is your end goal with this? Are there very specific types of content that you're looking to build to reach out to specific educators or specific educator groups, or something totally different than that? I guess that's my first question.
Yeah, so I think it's a huge space, right? So I could rattle off stuff, but we haven't really tried to prioritize. I mean, obviously there are certain, and we're just starting to show this to various folks, so we'll see what audiences this resonates with. But yes, what's the vision or the dream, right? I think the dream would be that we mature this into a framework that becomes a natural part of kind of the outreach ecosystem for missions and scientists, right? You've got a cool discovery, missions doing something interesting. This is one of the places that you plug things in, you develop stuff for. right? So that's part of it. And then the other part of the dream or vision would be that we grow a community of thousands of people out there, students and others, who are interested enough in astrobiology that they go through this sort of thing and are kind of amateur or citizen communicators of astrobiology science. And so, if you think about the bigger picture, as you and I've talked about this, Dave and I've talked about this, many folks here have talked about this. We're entering an era. We saw it with the Venus phosphine thing, right? Where there are going to be news stories that get people very excited about discoveries that are still contentious, right? And some of them will be wrong, and some of them will lead to more research. And so developing a community of folks, a diverse community of folks, ideally in terms of age, experience, demographics, et cetera, who are kind of more conversant than the average with the issues, with the challenges, with what's real and what isn't, seemed like a good idea, right? So that's, I think, part of the vision too, is if you had thousands of people out there who are part of a community that is, kind of amateur astrobiologists, that would be pretty cool and useful for NASA. I just see some notes here I need to catch up on.
So I'm seeing some pathways into this sort of ambassador group. You mentioned in your intro screen this we are the era, the experts in an outreach for astrobiology group, or however you phrased it. And then you get this ID card and you get badges. I guess one vision for this is to have folks who get some number of badges or some specific types of badges, then like one next step. Is that kind of, I see your
I've thought a little bit of
that kind of.
I've totally thought a little bit about that. So we're obviously kind of marketing this to the general community or general public, but I could imagine a subset of lessons that, I think we talked about this when we initially met, right? If we could vet users depending on like sort of the level of interest and interaction that they have, and kind of if there's a way to filter them in certain directions to kind of foster that interest in everything, I think that could be a really cool aspect. And so, yeah, maybe that's done through badging or through specific trainings. We just kind of have to think about how that might go down.
I think it's kind of related to what you're bringing up. It's important to stress, one of the big differences between this and everything we've done with Infiniscope so far is all the development previously was focused on what do teachers need to teach in the classroom, and how do we take this NASA content or that NASA content and make it useful in that context, right? It was very teacher first, and we learned how to do that, and it's hard. I mean, it's much harder than people think, right? Especially when you want to get into something that's really interactive and be realistic, be honest about the science, because the reality is that even in a high school classroom, there's a lot they don't know, right? And so you end up having to teach more than what the teacher wants to teach, and it's challenging, right? So here we've taken a very different approach, and we're not trying to say one is better than the other. It's just different. We just thought it's time for us to do a different approach where we're kind of mission science first. So what does the mission want to teach? What are the concepts? Maybe that won't go into a classroom very well. Maybe it'll only go to certain kinds of classrooms. It's going to be, and that's why I think it should be open more to the general public in some ways, because we think there's probably a lot of people out there who are astrobiology interested, who aren't necessarily sitting in a classroom, but would be intrigued to go through something like this, right? So it's somewhere at the boundary between formal and kind of informal ed. And we're not worrying quite as much as we have before with this anyway, about aligning with NGSS standards and such, although it does align in certain ways. I'm saying all this partly for Hillary Davis's benefits, and she's our evaluator, so she knows we're thinking about this.
I think for me, I'm trying to think of how to incorporate something like this into my own teaching. I have a course that starts for Atlas Obscura, next week or in 2 weeks, where it's a live online course where I give lectures, but then the students will have some activities in between. There's a 2-week period where I'm traveling, and so my students won't have anything from me. And so something like this could be beneficial, I would think, in that kind of realm, but I would need a way to tie it back into my own teaching as well. And then I'm also building an online astrobiology course that's kind of learn at your own pace. And so just for me, thinking of ways that you can incorporate this into the informal education side of things, and what that would look like for me to evaluate whether or not it's of value for the students, and maybe even to know from my students firsthand if they would want to engage with something like this. And so I think having like a kind of maybe a structure that I could show them in a lecture where it's like, this is what you could do to explore this topic further if you'd like more, could be fairly helpful. Because I'm trying to think of like, how would I have my students go and explore this and think of it as something valuable, as opposed to being something where it's like, I just have them going and like learning on their own and not learning from me.
Yep.
Yeah, David, I see your hand up.
Yeah, this is terrific, really interesting, compelling. I really enjoyed the tour, and it's enticing to think of how this might be used. And I'm intrigued by this idea of ambassadors, analogous with the solar system ambassadors. And I guess now, I mean, I know about the solar system ambassadors. Now I'm curious to know a little bit more in detail how it works, and if we might translate that to, a sort of astrobiology ambassadors kind of cadre. I think that, just thinking of Ariel's example of like, okay, so there's a news story about phosphine or something. I would say, having gone through this kind of training doesn't equip somebody to then go and comment on something like a phosphine discovery. But what might happen is it gets you to be a member of this cadre, which then we could have a briefing for those people when there's a story like this and say, here's how we are thinking about how to talk about this this phosphine discovery or whatever. Here's what we know. Here's what we're saying. Here's what we're not saying. And so they would be equipped enough to then like have some kind of another level of training that was specifically about that event, and then be able to kind of go out and help discuss it in a way that hopefully would kind of contribute to the right kind of knowledge about that. So is that kind of what you're thinking about how an ambassadors program might work?
I think that's part of it. I mean, you're creating a community of folks who have kind of self-selected, right, as being interested in this. I think there is a level of, even though going through this doesn't necessarily prepare them for phosphine, because there's nothing with phosphine, for example, right? And by inherently, this is going to be about past exploration, not about something brand new, right? But we would be, I think, training folks or selecting for folks who are already inclined to think in ways that are optimistically skeptical, right? So train them. This is hard. This is not easy. It's not like, we see something, we have some line of evidence that's magical, right? I think a lot of people out there do think that way because they haven't thought about it deeply. They haven't been exposed to it. So by going through these experiences that basically, the message is for some people a bit of a downer, right? Oh, cool. Cyanobacteria, stromatolites. Oh, but we haven't found them on Mars. And right now, at least until we find something, the message is always going to be, oh, but we haven't found it. So going through an experience that shows you why we haven't found it, what are gets you thinking about criteria, gets you thinking about standards of evidence, that prepares that community, I think, to be to be ready for those kind of conversations, David, right? And then to be constructive and really useful in talking to the media and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer in the sense that we're saying like, oh, no, we haven't found this, we haven't found that. That's not real. But it's exciting in the sense that this connects you with real exploration and real missions and real data and cool pictures and being part of something that NASA's doing. So I think that's the compensation there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some meta messages that I'd love to convey somehow through these activities, which are a little harder to do, but we've talked about this, right? The search for life, astrobiology is about trying to understand the distribution of life in the universe, whatever it is, and understand why it is what it is, right? So even if it turns out that we are alone, that's like not interesting. In some ways, that's super interesting, right? And so if we could somehow capture a bit of that flavor, right? So it's not just a treasure hunt, where if you don't find the treasure, you're disappointed. Which I think is how many people's psychology around this is, but rather this is about trying to investigate one of the most profound questions humans can ask. And whatever the answer is, it's super important and interesting. And this is how we go about it.
By the way, what you just said is very consonant with something we're trying to do at headquarters now with the astrobiology program, which is move NASA away from describing astrobiology as the search for life, which they always want to do because it's a nice tagline, and we're trying to come up with equally exciting taglines that portray it as something more broad for just the reasons you've just articulated.
So credit to Kristen. We originally were calling the Search for Life, and about a year ago, I had a conversation with Kristen about this before she left the SciAct, and she said, "Why are you calling it Search for Life?" And she said, "Look, nobody actually cares." I mean, the way she phrased it was, nobody actually cares about Search for Life. What they care about is, are we alone? And what they're really thinking about is intelligent life, right? That's what's really in people's minds, right? So if you really want to connect with people, you go in with that question, and then you somehow transition them into, well, of course, we want to look for microbes because that's going to be easier to find if there is life. And so that's where we start. And so, so she was probably picking up on some of those conversations at headquarters that were nascent a year ago. So where do we go from here? I mean, there seems to be some enthusiasm and ideas. Thank you, David.
Sorry, I was just thinking I think there's a lot of synergy between several SciAct projects here as well. We've mentioned the obvious one, solar system ambassadors, and maybe some sort of astrobiology ambassadors spin off of that. What about the scope mission liaison effort? I feel like maybe that is some untapped synergy, right? That program where experts, or I guess SMEs from specific missions, are brought into the scope SciAct team and can then, well, maybe you can, Ariel, maybe you're on the scope team, so maybe you can explain that better.
I'm on the scope team. Jess Swan, who's the deputy PI of scope and also heavily involved in Infiniscope, couldn't be here today, so I'll do the best I can. So so the mission liaisons are, these are folks who are recruited and compensated a bit, right, to be they're mission involved scientists who would be liaisons to the SciAct as a whole, is the idea. So certainly, Infiniscope and Are We Alone is a member of the SciAct, right? Part of the SciAct ecosystem. So one could imagine those folks playing this role, but I wouldn't want to limit it to liaisons. Not all of them are going to be interested in doing digital outreach, right?
Sure.
Question. Hey, Svet, thanks very much, and thank you very much for the presentation. In line with the comment that David just made about the sense of engaging communities, the questions that can be asked is, we're searching for life somewhere over there. We can ask, are we alone? A question that came up, Bill Nelson commented upon at one of the OSIRIS-REx media presentations. Inquiry into this exploration invites us to ask the question, who are we? And so I'm kind of curious, from the perspective of the technology that you're presenting there, how does it help the learner, ask, well, who am I? I'm here in some rural town in Wisconsin. What does that mean about how I go about my day and apply to my healthcare or my education or my family or my being, in this world? So I'm just kind of like tossing that out. It's a little more kind of arts and humanities meaning oriented, but just kind of curious, what your thinking was about, engagement of why are we doing this? Well, how does it help us? One of my favorite jokes is about the farmer who's sitting in the back of the room and he raises his hand and he says, well, hey, how is this going to help me grow corn?
Yeah, thanks for that, Daniel. In the 5 minutes that we have left, let's talk about next steps. I want to make sure we are conscious of everyone's time. So as we're approaching the end of the hour, where do we go from here? I see, Graham, I see your message about NASA astrobiology ambassadors as a way of bringing enthusiastic people who want to do basically public engagement events. That's a cool idea. I've seen several of you offer ideas for additional module development. Graham and Lisa, I think I saw your comments on that. I see a comment about Spanish language translation, which, yes, that would be a very cool future, maybe long-term future idea.
Yeah, that I would just say Spanish language translation. It's straightforward. It's just finding the right expertise, right, and either paying for it or having people volunteer to do it. Technologically, it's really simple.
Yeah, I'm bilingual, Ariel. I can do it. Pretty easy.
Very cool. Very cool. And yeah, I guess the next question is, go ahead, Ariel.
I'm gonna say maybe Svet, you and I, and maybe consulting with David and Linda's here too. Maybe we should just have some offline conversation or sort of organizing the thoughts that came from this and thinking what might be a good next step. Maybe talking with Graham and Lisa and others. I think Graham signed off, I guess.
Definitely.
I mean, folks who spoke up here are really enthusiastic about certain aspects of this. We should tap their expertise and enthusiasm.
Totally.
Definitely. Okay. In that case, I can follow up with you all on that. Well, thank you all so much.
I was just going to say, I feel like we skipped Daniel's question, which is, it's always a challenging one. How does this help you grow corn in Kansas or whatever? At some level, in the immediate sense, it doesn't. In the longer sense, and David, if he was here, could probably speak more eloquently to this than I can, right? Advancing science advances knowledge, which trickles around, moves around, flows around in ways you can't anticipate to have benefits for all sorts of things that we do.
Yeah.
That's not always a satisfying answer, though. But it's true. How would we be growing corn if not for Darwin and others thinking about evolution and getting other folks thinking about genes and thinking through all these sorts of things. So it's hard to articulate the value of these kind of somewhat stochastic but process of information diffusing and being a practical benefit.
But Ariel, in a sense, one thing we need to realize is that this architecture would allow, if somebody were interested in putting that in, the architecture would allow that concept to be put into this so that you could demonstrate that, talk about that, have a whole pathway about explaining that as a scientist. So yes, absolutely, it could fit into the project.
Yeah, for sure. Why do we care? You could imagine a whole module around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could comment from my perspective, it helps integrate the precision science approach, which is highly valuable in a STEM orientation, with early learners who might have more of an arts and humanities approach. The SETI Institute runs a class for community colleges that, a couple of different sessions ago, Simon presented on the community college approach, and it's for on space sciences, and it might be the only science class that the student takes. Okay, so how do you meet the student where they're at and help bridge them? And so metaphors and concepts of arts and humanities can be really nice entries to weave it in and then weave it out. Help them come in, reel in, let them go, catch and release. Just like you're fishing for students, something like that.
Yep. To Jeff's point, the framework is flexible, so we could incorporate those kind of aspects.
Okay.
Great. We're at time, I guess.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for your input. We are all, I know many of us are taking active notes here. I know I am. I see you are, Diana. I will follow up shortly. And thanks again to the Guild members who added their valuable input. We will stay tuned. You will hear from us more about this topic, definitely in the near future. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.